So today I'm going to be walking through how to make 4 different versions of a Bardot top, all with the same pattern. You can either make these as standard tops or you can add them to my other mix and match patterns and make dresses or jumpsuits. I've tried to keep everything as beginner friendly as possible, and I have added the pattern to my Etsy, which is linked down below. So let's get on with the tutorial. So this is everything that you're going to need for this particular project. You will need a fabric with 4-way stretch. I'm using 95% cotton, 5% elastane, which would be the perfect composition if you can find something similar to this. You will need some matching thread, some pins, some fabric scissors or a rotary cutter, some fabric pens or tailor's chalk. I prefer fabric pens when I'm working with stretch fabric because tailor's chalk can tend to stretch the fabric a little. I'm using these water-soluble fabric pens from Amazon, and you will also need an iron. So for this project, I'm going to be using 2 machines. I'm going to be using a regular machine, which is one of the Singer heavy duty machines, and an overlocker, which is the Brother Lock 734DS. This is optional. You don't need an overlocker. If you don't have one, don't worry. You can just use a zigzag stitch on your regular machine instead. If you are new to sewing with stretchy fabrics, I would recommend taking some scraps of the fabric that you're going to use and practice moving around your settings to find the perfect settings for that particular fabric. The 2 settings that I change the most are the length and the tension when I'm working with stretchy fabrics. So this is the pattern that I'm going to be using for this project, and it is my Bardot top pattern. There are 3 pattern pieces for this pattern, and the first one is pattern piece 1, which is the top. This will act as the front and the back of the top, and you will cut 2 or 4 pieces of this. So the reason that there is a difference in the number is that there are 4 different constructions that you can follow for this pattern. So there is a regular Bardot top, there is a Bardot with sleeves, a Bardot with a fold over, and a Bardot with a fold over and sleeves. So the Bardot with a fold over and sleeves is the only one that you will only cut 2, because that one doesn't need a lining. You can get away with not having a lining on that one, although you can add one if you want to. Whereas the other 3 all have a lining, which means you have 2 pieces for the front of the top and 2 pieces for the back for a total of 4. And then I have pattern piece 2, which is the sleeve. For this one, you will cut 2 pieces, and obviously you will only cut this one out if you want to add sleeve. And then finally, you have pattern piece 3, which is the fold over. You will cut 2 of these on the fold, obviously if you want to add a fold over. So now I'm just going to walk through how to best lay your pattern pieces out. So the first thing that you want to do is lay your fabric out correctly. So you want to find the selvage edge of your fabric. So this is the finished edge of your fabric. So it will be slightly different to your raw edges. You can see these edges are curling, but your selvage edge isn't. And quite often with stretchy fabric, this selvage edge is finished with glue. So you can quite often feel the difference. So this is quite a rough edge compared to this one. And you can quite often see the difference as well. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it on camera. You can just about see that glue. So once you've found those selvage edges, you should have 2 on your fabric. I'm going to fold that fabric so that you've got both selvage edges on top of each other, which means you've got a selvage edge at this end and a fold at the other end. And then you can start to lay your pieces out. So you'll see on your pattern pieces that you have a grain line going up the center. So this grain line wants to always be parallel to that selvage edge. So it'll be the same for your top piece and your sleeve piece. You just want to line up that grain line. If you want to be precise about this, you can take a tape measure and measure the top of the grain line and the bottom of the grain line to check that they are both about the same distance away from that edge. And then for your other piece, which is your fold over, this one just wants to line up the straight edge to the fold of the fabric. This one also has a grain line, but by default, because of lining up to that fold, the grain line will also be parallel to the selvage edge. So I'm just going to start to draw those pieces in place. So once those pieces are all drawn out, I'm going to take some pins and just pin within those lines. That's just going to help for those 2 layers to stay together and make sure that your pieces are all nice and accurate. So once you've got all of those pins in place, you can start to cut out your pieces. Just be very careful to make sure you're not stretching the fabric as you're cutting, and make sure that you're getting both layers of the fabric. And then I'll walk through which pieces you need depending on which construction you're choosing. So first of all, if you are making the standard Bardot top, all you need is 4 pieces of the top. 2 of these will act as the front, 2 of these will act as the back, and obviously 2 of those will be a lining. The one thing to bear in mind is when you're cutting your pieces out, obviously you're cutting them on a folded piece of fabric. So even though you need 4 pieces of this, you only need to draw it out twice. For the Bardot with sleeves, you will need 4 pieces of the top again, and then 2 pieces of the sleeve. For the Bardot with a foldover, you will need 4 pieces of the top again and 2 pieces of your foldover, and obviously this was cut on a fold, so it's twice as big as the pattern piece. And then finally, for the Bardot with a foldover and sleeves, you will need 2 pieces for the top, 2 pieces for the foldover, and 2 pieces for the sleeves. You can do a lined version of this as well if you want, so for that you would need 4 pieces rather than 2, but you don't need to do a lined one like you do with the others. So I'm going to start by making the standard Bardot. I'm going to take 2 out of 4 of my pieces and lay them one on top of the other with right sides facing together. I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to pin along the neckline, around the armholes and along that bottom edge. But if you want to use this top to make a dress or a jumpsuit, you want to leave that bottom edge untouched. So just leave this open for the whole construction. So once you've got those pins in place, I'm going to go along and sew each of those edges with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. So just right along the neckline, around each of the armholes and along the bottom edge. I'm going to be leaving the side seams open and also the top of the straps. And also remember that if you are making a dress or a jumpsuit, to leave this bottom edge open as well. So hopefully you can just about see each of those seams in place, and you can see that the top of the strap and the side seams are left open. And I've gone in and repeated those same steps for my remaining 2 pieces. So I've got 2 identical pieces all sewn around the neckline, armholes and this bottom edge if you're not making it into a dress or a jumpsuit. I'm going to take this top piece, doesn't matter which one you take, and turn it to the right side out. And now I'm going to take this piece that is the right way out and I'm going to place it inside the other piece which is inside out and match up all of those corresponding edges. So just placing it between those 2 layers. So now that I've got those 2 pieces all lined up, so I've got this piece that is the right way up lined up to all the corresponding edges of the piece that is inside out. So you can see I've got the strap inside the strap here, side seam inside the side seam. Hopefully that makes sense. I should also mention this piece is by default a reversible piece. So if you want to, you can use a different fabric for the lining and have a reversible top. You just need to make sure that when you get to this part, you have corresponding fabrics facing each other. So now I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to pin the straps in place and the side seams. So now you can just go in and sew each of those layers in place, just making sure that you're careful to get all 4 layers for each of those sections. And then once those edges are sewn in place, so both of those side seams and the top of the straps, I'm just going to unpick a small hole along the armhole to allow us to turn the top to the right side out. So once you've got that hole unpicked, it doesn't need to be a huge hole. You can use that to turn the top to the right side out. I would recommend reinforcing the stitching on either side before you do that, but I'm lazy, so I'm not going to. So I'm just going to slowly feed the top through that hole. And then all that you've got left to do now is to close up this hole. I'm going to do that with a ladder stitch by hand, but if you wanted to add a top stitch to this, which I'm not going to, I prefer these without, but you can top stitch around that armhole and sew that hole closed in doing so if you want. But I'm going to use a ladder stitch, so I'll show you how I'm going to do that. So for my ladder stitch, I'm just going to fold that hole in on itself, which is quite easy to do because of where the seams were initially. And I'm going to come over this side for 1 stitch and then back over to the other side for 1 stitch, just trying to keep it as parallel as possible. very tricky for me because I'm doing this in a weird angle. So it's not coming out very parallel, but that's your goal. And then back over to the other side for one stitch, and then over to the other side. So I'm going to continue doing that for the length of the hole, and then I'm going to come back so that I've got a double layer of stitches and then tie off down here. And once that hole is all closed up, I've just given my top a press and then it's all done. So now I can move on to the Bardot with sleeves. So the first thing I'm going to do is to take 2 of my 4 top pieces, lay them one on top of the other with right sides facing together, and I'm going to pin along the neckline and the bottom edge. You want to leave this bottom edge untouched for the whole construction if you are making a dress or a jumpsuit. So once those pins are in place, I'm going to sew along the top of the neckline and along the bottom edge with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. So hopefully you can just about see where I've sewn along that neckline and the bottom edge. Again, remember to leave this untouched if you want to make a dress or a jumpsuit. And I've repeated those same steps for my remaining 2 pieces. So I'm going to take this one on top and turn it to the right side out. So you should have one piece that's inside out and one piece that's the right way out. And I'm going to take the piece that is the right way out and place it inside the piece that is inside out. And just start to match up those corresponding edges. So just placing the strap inside the strap. And I'm going to pin that in place. I'm going to do that again for the other side, just making sure that the top isn't twisted inside. And then doing the same thing with those side seams. And you should be pinning through 4 layers of fabric here. And now you can sew along those side seams and the top of the straps. I'm going to use an overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch, just making sure that you're careful to get all 4 layers of fabric in each section. So once you've sewn those side seams and the top of the straps, you can turn this piece to the right side out and you can use the open armholes to do that. It should be looking something like this, and I'm just going to put this to one side for now while we prepare the sleeves. So I have one of the pieces of my sleeve here. I'm just going to fold it in half with right sides facing together, and I'm going to pin along that side seam. And I can sew that side seam in place with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. And once that side seam is in place, I'm just going to take this piece and turn it to the right side out. And then while this is folded in half, make sure it's folded right down the center. And then I'm just going to place a pin at the center point of this sleeve cap. Just going to make it a little bit more precise when I attach it to the top. So I'm going to grab back my top piece now, and your armhole should still be fully open and unsewn. I'm going to take my sleeve and place it inside that hole. And then I'm just going to pin the center point of that sleeve cap to the top of the strap. Pin that in place. And then I'm also going to pin the side seam of the sleeve to the side seam of the top. And once those 2 pins are in place, I'm going to go in and pin the rest of that armhole around the rest of that sleeve cap. And that should look something like this. I'm going to repeat that for my other sleeve, and I'm going to sew them both in place with my overlocker. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch. So then once those armholes are sewn in place, you can turn the top to the right side out. It should look something like this. Now, the only thing you've got left to do now is to hem the bottom edge of your sleeves. So I'm just going to do a standard single hem. So I'm going to fold that edge in on itself and finish it off with a zigzag stitch. But I'm going to talk about hems in a tiny bit more detail towards the end of the video. So if you want a bit more information on hemming your sleeves, I'll leave a timestamp on the screen now. So now I can move on to make the first of my fold over Bardots, and this is the sleeveless version. So I'm starting with 2 of my 4 top pieces, and I've laid them one on top of the other with right sides facing together. And now I'm going to take some pins. I'm going to pin around those armholes and along that bottom edge. If you are making a dress or a jumpsuit, you want to leave this bottom edge untouched for the whole of this construction, so just leave this open. So once those pins are in place, you can go in and sew each of those edges with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch, so just around the armholes and along that bottom edge, remembering to leave the bottom edge untouched if you're making a dress or a jumpsuit. So once those 3 edges are sewn in place, I've just gone in and repeated exactly the same steps for my 2 remaining pieces of the top pattern. And I'm going to take this one on top and turn it to the right side out. So you should have one that's inside out, one that is the right way out. I'm going to take the piece that is the right way out and place it in between the 2 layers of the piece that is inside out. So just placing it in here, and then match up all of those corresponding edges. So match up those side seams, match up the straps, and then we're going to start to pin it in place. So I'll start with the strap, just placing that strap inside the other strap and then pin it in place. And the same for the other side, just making sure that nothing is twisted inside. And then I'm also going to do the same thing with those side seams. So just matching them up and pinning along each side. So once you've finished adding those pins, you can go in with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch and sew each of those seams in place. So just both of those side seams and the top of the straps. Just make sure you're careful to get all 4 layers in each of those seams. So once those side seams and the top of the straps are sewn in place, I'm just going to turn this to the right side out. You can do that through the open neckline, and that will look something like this. And I'm just going to put this piece to one side for now. So now moving on to make the fold over, I've just got both of my fold over pieces here, laid them one on top of the other with right sides facing together, and I'm going to take my pins and just pin along those side seams on both sides. And now you can go and sew those edges in place with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Once you've got those side seams sewn in place, I'm just going to fold this piece with wrong sides facing together so that we hide that seam. And that should look something like this. And now before I add this to the neckline of my top, I'm going to take some pins and I'm going to find the 1/2 and 1/4 points of this area around here. And that's going to help us to more accurately attach it to that neckline. So your 1/2 points will be those side seams, so that's nice and simple. And the same on the other side. And then your 1/4 points, I'm going to take those 2 pins, lay them one on top of the other, and then the new folds that you have at these sides will be your 1/4 points. It should look something like this, and I'm going to grab back my top now. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with finding those 1/2 and 1/4 points of this neckline. So our 1/2 points again will be the top of the straps, and then to find those 1/4 points, I'm going to place those straps one on top of the other, and then those new folds that we've got at the sides become our 1/4 points. And then I'm going to start to use all of those points to pin that fold over to my neckline. So I'm going to start by just placing that fold over the top of the neckline before I start to pin anything in place. And now you can start to match up those pins. So I'm going to match up the side seam of the fold over to the top of the strap. and then I can remove the pin underneath, match up that center point of the fold over to the center point of the top. And you will be working with 4 layers here, so just make sure that you get all 4 in the pin. And again, remove the one underneath, and then it's the same for these last 2. So side seam of the fold over to the seam at the top of the strap, and then finally we've got the center back of the top and the center back of the fold over. And remove that final one. And now I'm just going to go in with a load more pins and fill in those gaps between the pins that we've already got. And once those pins are in place, you can go in with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch and sew that neckline in place. Just again, be very careful to make sure you're getting all 4 layers of the fabric. And once that neckline is sewn in place, you can turn this top to the right side up. It should look something like this, and then this top is finished. So now we can move on to the final top, which is the fold over Bardot with sleeves. So first of all, I'm going to take my 2 pieces of the top pattern, lay them one on top of the other with right sides facing together, and I'm just going to pin along the top of those straps. And I can sew the top of those straps in place with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. So once those straps are sewn in place, I'm just going to take this piece and lay it out flat with the right side facing up. And now I'm just going to grab one of my sleeves. I'm going to take this sleeve and fold it in half, just so that I can find the center point of that sleeve cap. I'm going to place a pin at this fold here. And then once you've got that center point, I'm going to use that to line up the sleeve to my top. So with right sides facing together, I'm going to place the sleeve next to that armhole, and I'm going to line up the center pin that I've got here to the seam at the top of the straps that we just sewed, and I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm also going to pin the edge of the sleeve cap on each side to the bottom of the armhole of the top. And again on the other side. And then once those 3 main points are pinned in place, you can go in with some more pins and fill in those gaps. And then once you've got that sleeve cap sewn in place, I'm just going to sew that with my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch. And then I'm just going to repeat the exact same steps for my second sleeve as well. So once those armholes are sewn in place, I'm just going to fold this with right sides facing together. And I'm going to pin along the side seams of the top and the side seams of the sleeves. And then you can sew all of those side seams in place with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. So just up the sleeve and down the side of the top. And once those edges are sewn in place, I'm just going to put this piece to one side for now. So now moving on to make the fold over, I've just got both of my fold over pieces here, laid them one on top of the other with right sides facing together, and I'm going to take my pins and just pin along those side seams on both sides. And now you can go and sew those edges in place with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Once you've got those side seams sewn in place, I'm just going to fold this piece with wrong sides facing together so that we hide that seam. And that should look something like this. And now before I add this to the neckline of my top, I'm going to take some pins and I'm going to find the 1/2 and 1/4 points of this area around here. And that's going to help us to more accurately attach it to that neckline. So your 1/2 points will be those side seams, so that's nice and simple. And the same on the other side. And then your 1/4 points, I'm going to take those 2 pins, lay them one on top of the other, and then the new folds that you have at these sides will be your 1/4 points. It should look something like this, and I'm going to grab back my top now. Now I just want to do exactly the same thing with my top, with finding those 1/2 and 1/4 points, but this time for the neckline. So my 1/2 points will be the seam at the top of the straps on both sides. And then to find those 1/4 points, I'm just going to fold my top with those 2 seams, one on top of the other. And then my 1/4 points will be at these new folds at the edges. So that will look something like this. And now I can start to add my fold over. So I'm going to take this fold over and just place it over the top of that neckline. It should look something like this. And then I'm just going to start to match up some of those pins. So pinning the side seam of the fold over to the seam at the top of the strap. And then I can just remove that second pin. And pinning the center of the fold over to the center of the top, and the same for the remaining 2 pins. So side seam to the seam of the strap, and then the center back of the top to the center back of the fold over. And then once you've got those main 4 pins in place, you can take some more pins and just fill in the gaps the rest of the way around. I should also mention you wanted to keep the top inside out for this. So don't turn it to the right side out, just keep it as it is. And once those pins are in place, you can go in with an overlocker or a zigzag stitch and sew that neckline in place. Just always being careful to make sure that you're getting all 3 layers of the fabric. And once that neckline's sewn in place, you can turn your top to the right side out. And now the only thing left to do is to hem the bottom edge of your sleeves and the bottom edge of your top. So I'm just going to be doing a very simple single hem. So I'm just going to fold the fabric to the wrong side and sew over the top of that with a zigzag stitch. Now, this is probably the place with stretchy fabric that you can go most wrong, in my opinion. This is the part that I would most recommend having a practice on some scrap fabric. So even though I have quite a lot of experience working with stretchy fabric, I still like to practice my hems before adding them onto the finished product. So I've practiced 2 different stitches here. They're both obviously a zigzag, but the big difference is that this one has a shorter length and a higher tension. And hopefully you can just about see the way that the fabric is kind of puckering. And that's just down to the tension and the length, whereas this one is nice and flat. So those are the settings that I'm going to go with. So I would really highly recommend just having a play with your machine and see what works the best. So this is how it looks on the other side. I always try to aim to have that zigzag partially over the end of the edge of that hem. I don't always do it perfectly, but that's my goal. So that's what you're aiming for with your hems. And once those hems are in place, then all 4 of your tops are finished.